And welcome back to Sports Talk on this Wednesday afternoon. I am the Iceman, Brandon Cohn, along with the Gunslinger, Mike Tipton. Call us at 880-5763, 880-KROD, or tweet us at 600-ESPN El Paso. I will read your tweets live on the air. Go to our website, 600ESPNElPaso.com, as we are streaming live here on our YouTube website here. 880-5763. We have a very special guest, folks. I went ahead and I previewed our guest here. It's two-time heavyweight champion, Olympic gold medalist, George Foreman. George, I'll tell you what a pleasure it is to have you on Sports Talk on this Wednesday afternoon.
It's my pleasure all the way.
Well, George, I'll tell you what, I want to know, in your opinion, what do you think about the state of boxing today, a sport that has changed so much from when you were fighting in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s?
I'm really happy about it. There's some good fighters. There's this Joshua over in Europe who's making a name for himself, and Dundee Wilder here. I like the state of boxing. The heavyweights, they are missing a lot of personality, but that's only because the writers have not given them their name. You know, it takes writers to create boxers and giants, and that's the only thing missing. But there are good fighters around. I saw this nice fight on television. It was in the lighter weights last weekend. It was a great fight too, but I'm looking for the heavyweights. Not a lot of them, not a lot of personality.
Again, we're speaking with former two-time heavyweight champion George Foreman. George, how different do you see the sport from when you fought in the golden era for heavyweights in the 90s when there were so many amazing heavyweights?
Well, when you would say the name heavyweight champion of the world, it would make you shake in your feet. I remember my dad would put his hand on my head and say, George Foreman, next champ of the world, whenever he was feeling good. So that was something special, and the guys who were trying to be champions thought a lot of it. That's just not the way it is right now. But if that can be turned around, I'm looking for one Olympic champion to come out of it and bring all their dynamite and electricity back to the sport. The guys train just as hard. They're not as skillful, but for good reasons. They make so much money too quickly.
George, because of the popularity that UFC has today, do you feel that boxing will ever regain the popularity that it had, per se, 15 years ago or so?
Oh, in my opinion, if you're going to ever see the biggest gate ever in anything, it's going to happen in boxing. And in a heavyweight boxing match, no sport will ever take the place of boxing. Now, the MMA and the UFC, I like it because they always equally match their opponents. And every time they get in there, it's a rough night for everybody. It's a good sport, and I follow it just as well, but it's not boxing. It'll never take its place.
Thoughts on a potential Mayweather versus McGregor fight, George? I mean, you know, you got Mayweather, who's one of the greatest boxers of all time, and McGregor, who's a good boxer, but he's an MMA fighter. Should this fight happen, and if so, who wins in your opinion?
Oh, the people make fights, not fighters. The people make fights. If they say, hey, this can bring on a prize, then I'm telling you, Mayweather will be just as do much more wrestling than he did boxing to come up with a big prize. But it's the people that make the fight. I remember back in the day, you would match a wrestler and a boxer, and it meant a lot, or a football player and a boxer. It always means something when a hero from another sport challenge a boxer, and it always will.
Again, we're speaking with two-time heavyweight champion, Olympic gold medalist, Big George Foreman. All right, Big George, so I got to ask you, talk about when you won the title by knocking out Joe Frazier in the second round in 1973, what that was like for you.
Oh, boy, and I tell you, it's like once that fight happened, I was afraid of Joe Frazier because he was the only guy I'd seen come up who fought everyone and really beat everyone. It was the old saying, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. He made a reality of that. So I was scared of him, and I really hoped that Frazier would die before I had to fight him. But he was alive. I was scared. I got in the ring, and I had to do anything. He was going to take my head off, and I out-jabbed him and threw an uppercut that knocked him down, and I just started going crazy as I had been for about 37 fights prior to that. I was joyed. I felt Joe Louis, Jack Dempsey, all of Muhammad Ali, all of the great fighters of the past, it was like they come alive in you in that moment. And that was probably one of the most splendid moments I've had as a boxer in the ring.
Speaking of Muhammad Ali, the Rumble in the Jungle in '74 against Muhammad Ali, what was that like for you? It was arguably known as the greatest sporting event in the 20th century in Zaire in front of 60,000 fans.
Yeah, I call it the mugging in the jungle because I came there with 2 belts and left with none.
Wow.
Muhammad Ali, he beat me. It was a tough fight. What happened, I had taken him for granted. Everybody said, George, don't hurt him. Please don't hurt him. I said, I'll just knock him out. So I was looking for a quick knockout, and I looked up. 7 rounds had gone by. There's no knockout, and I spent everything I had. And there, this guy still screaming in my ear. He hit me with the quickest right hand that I never saw. I was waiting for a count of 8. When I jumped up, the fight was over. Devastation. But this was no doubt probably the toughest man I'd ever got into the ring with. He didn't hit me the hardest, but the toughest fella I'd ever fought.
After that fight, I know a couple years later you ended up retiring, and then you came back, and ultimately, you know, you regained the championship. But talk about what made you decide to come back after being absent from boxing for so long. You started your comeback in the late 80s at that point.
That's right. 10 years, I became an evangelist with the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ in Houston, and I spent all my time traveling as an evangelist, telling my story about how I got acquainted with God. I didn't intend to box again. I never took a shirt off, and all I did was to eat food to make certain I wouldn't.
All those cheeseburgers.
But that profound thing happened to me. I became broke. And I had no other profession. I had to come back, and I didn't want to do it. And everybody laughed at me, made jokes about me, but I kept training, got my timing back, my jab, uppercuts, and I got a second chance after losing to Evander Holyfield in 91. By 94, I was back on my game, and I got a chance with Michael Moore. He just kept standing right there in front of me as though he was the puncher. And there I was, the heavyweight champ of the world, 20 years after losing it. That's something strange. Even now, I look at it as the strangest thing that ever happened to me.
Again, we're speaking with 2-time heavyweight champion George Foreman. George, I'll never forget it. I was a kid with my dad here in El Paso watching you knock out Moore with that straight right hand, which your right hand, your jab, was like literally as strong as anybody's power shot. When you knocked him out and you won that fight and you kneeled down in prayer in the corner, what exactly went into your mind at that moment?
Now, I've been boxing now 10 years. I told you I have as a preacher and an evangelist. Mm-hmm. I got back into the ring. I never spoke about religion. I don't have to. But I said, leaving my room that day, going to the boxing match, I said, you know, God, I never talk religion or point up to the sky or nothing. I said, but if I win this thing, this time I'm going to get on my knees and thank God for it. And I said, oh, thank you, Jesus, on the floor. Got down on my knees. I couldn't believe it. It happened. I trained for it. I knew I could do it. But in sports, it's still how the ball bounces. Mm-hmm. You just never know.
Again, we're speaking with George Foreman, 2-time heavyweight champion. George, you became the oldest man at 45 to regain the heavyweight championship. My dad used to say to me that you had 2 unique things that you did. Number 1, you would stand up during rounds, which you don't ever see. And number 2, you had a crab-like defense. Talk to me about those 2 things, because your defense was hard to break, and standing up during rounds, that's unprecedented.
Well, when I came back into boxing, I worked out in the gym with my old styles of parrying punches. I stopped them before they get started. But those young guys were beating me to the punch. I said, I'll reach out, and they'd already hit me. I said, something's going to happen. So I put my defense close and didn't move it around, kept it in one place so I could block shots and not have to reach out. So I saw it from Archie Moore. He didn't teach it to me, but learned to cross my arms so my defense and my hands would stay close to me. And then about standing up in between rounds, I figured I came back with 260, 70 pounds. I said, if I sit down, I'm not getting up. So I had to stand up.
That's awesome. Again, we're speaking with Big George Foreman. So what's your most memorable fight of all time? You've had so many awesome fights. What's the greatest one for you of all time, George?
I was a 19-year-old boy in Mexico City, the 1968 Olympics. I won that gold medal. I had never had a dream to come true. Never. And there I was standing on that platform. They'd put the gold medal in my hand and gave me a little box and a prize. And I was listening to the national anthem. And I thought, this is a dream. In a moment, I'm going to wake up. And I still feel like that now. Am I going to wake up and say, this is not me doing this interview? That started my dreaming, and I haven't gotten over it. I'm still that 19-year-old boy in an unbelievable position.
George, after you fought Hollyfield, April 19, 1991, I'll never forget that date like it was yesterday, watching that fight with my dad here at the Sunland Park Racetrack Casino. You were the first fighter to go to distance with Hollyfield. He was as tough as nails. And I remember that seventh round where the crowd went nuts because you landed some big clubbing blows. You momentarily stunned him. How much respect do you feel that people had for you after you were able to go the distance with the great Evander Holyfield, the first fighter, by the way, to ever do so?
Well, the good thing about it, I came back. I was in a church getting money for my youth center. Mm-hmm. And the guy had asked George, asked the people, come on, give more to George. He's trying to help kids. I stayed in the area of Georgia for a few days. And I remember thinking, I'm never going to ask anybody for money again. I'm going to be heavyweight champion of the world to do it. So I'm in the ring with Evander Holyfield, and he's doing his thing. And I went for a knockout. I missed him. He kept fighting. I realized for the first time they are just as tough in this era as they were in the days of Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier. I come out of that ring with respect for him, but people had to know that I came back to win the heavyweight title, not to win a whole lot of money and go home with, look, he got the money. You know, you hear guys all the time saying, I get in the ring for $1 million.
Right.
But that was not going to be me. I got in the ring to really win the title, sure. And people saw it. I didn't win that fight that night. I lost on a few points, but points being made at the age 40 and 50 is not a death sentence.
Without question. George, you worked with Archie Moore, Angelo Dundee in your corner. What was it like working with those two boxing legends for so many years?
Archie Moore, you should call him Teacher Moore. There's no one who taught me more about boxing or delivery of punches than Archie Moore and doing combinations. And Angelo Dundee, the greatest corner man ever. You put him in the corner, that's where he came alive. In the ring and the training and all of that, that wasn't Angelo Dundee. But once that bell rang, as much as you fought, he worked the corner. And I don't know how I got through the first 12 rounds. I wouldn't have done it without Angelo Dundee with the Holyfield. And then the 10th round, Angelo said, you got to do something, son. You may be behind. He was always trying to be nice to me. I said, you shouldn't bother me. He said, but, son, you got to do something. And I went out and got the knockout with Michael Moore because of that casual conversation with Angelo Dundee, a great corner man. Again, it was spectacular to even know those men.
Again, we're speaking with two-time former heavyweight champ George Foreman. It was like yesterday. I was in the car sitting with my dad and his buddy, 1989, and they asked each other, if Foreman fought Tyson, how many rounds would it go? And my dad's friend said, 1 round. You never fought Tyson, but had you fought Tyson, I imagine you feel and you know you could have won, and how long would the fight have gone?
I saw Mike Tyson. I was making my comeback, and he was fighting Burbick, and it must have been about 1988, and I saw a phenomenon. This guy delivered shots so quick. He wasn't that big, and that aided his delivery of speed. Hit you in the temple, and your legs did crazy things. And I saw him fight a couple of more guys, and I realized, you know what? I'm not interested in fighting him, period. And I'm going to be honest with you. To say I could beat him, I'm just happy we never fought. What a phenomenon. If we got into the ring, I don't think the fight would have gone no more than 3 rounds, and I would just hope I would win, but I didn't want any of that Mike Tyson. No way.
Some people said he was scared of you and he didn't want none of you.
One was scared and the other was glad of it.
George, I love cheeseburgers just like you. I'm a big fella, so I got to ask you about your love for cheeseburgers and the George Foreman grill, because that's a nice device you got there.
Yeah, that grill, I'd come out of boxing, and for 10 years I dedicated myself to the steaks and the salad and the healthy food. So I left boxing for 10 years. I'd gone by a Jack in the Box, and I'd ordered a cheeseburger. I didn't know about these fast food chains. They didn't exist in Houston when I left.
Right.
It was so delicious that I made a round back and changed my name, changed my voice. I said, "May I have 3 cheeseburgers?" And I didn't realize I was driving a Rolls Royce. How many times can a Rolls Royce go by? So I decided that was the food that I really wanted in my life, and I ate so many of them. And my weight went up to 315 because of my love for the cheeseburger. To this day, I think the greatest thing that can happen to any young man is a cheeseburger.
George, I'll tell you, you're hilarious. What's going on in your life nowadays, George, now that you've been retired for a good while?
Yeah, I travel around and I speak. That's what I do as my profession. I'm always trying to sell things. We were pretty successful with the campaign with the George Foreman grill, and then I sold the company. Now I'm working on building up a shoe product. A lot of the people who were bought grills by their parents, now they got to go back and buy the George Foreman shoes so they can give it to their parents and make them keep moving around. So I'm working on that shoe idea. And, of course, I've done a lot of other things, trying to find inventors, help so they can get their product in stores. So I'm awful busy, and I got about 14 or 15 grandkids who are like bugs. They're in my head. They're on my shoes. They got everything. And I'm loving it, though. It's the greatest thing that could happen to me or grandkids.
Well, 2-time former heavyweight champion George Foreman. My late father, who passed away last June, would be so proud that I had you on Sports Talk and that I will have you on my show in the future. And this has been the honor of all honors, as you literally were my childhood idol. And if I said when I was a kid, if I could have met one athlete growing up, it would have been Big George.
Thanks so much. Give me your father's name right quick so I don't forget it.
His name was Jack Cohn.
Jack Cohn. Right on, Jack.
Yay.
I'm not going to forget that because I feel like now we are equally partners.
Oh, Big George Foreman, it means the world that you join me here on Sports Talk this afternoon. We will be having you on again in the future. Thank you so much for your time, champ.
Anytime. God bless. Bye-bye.
God bless you, too. Big George Foreman, former 2-time heavyweight champion, joining us live here on Sports Talk. We got to take a time out. Mike Tipton has the news and, of course, your commercials. You're listening to Sports Talk on this Wednesday afternoon, 600 ESPN El Paso.